Story 1. Then again, but maybe not. The wind brushing up against my face was common, but it never felt settled to me, never felt as if it was there to cool or comfort, only there to remind me of where I was. In my bed laid me, and in me laid my mind, which was a sanctuary where I reviewed the past events of life. Most nights the same memories would flash across my mind, my temple. Occasionally, however, a past instance unbeknownst to me would arise in the inner confines of my brain. These instances were special. They proved to me that there was more than just the tangible memories. These memories weren't real, yet they were. They had to be, or else how did I have them? One night, the wind was prominent. It was grazing against my mind, urging it to think. And so, like most nights, I would try to have thoughts until sleep fell upon me. That night was different, though. It was different because I wanted to rest. I didn't want to be kept awake in the complex and constant firings of the synaptic nerves inside me. Nevertheless, I knew that my longing to sleep was futile, and so I succumbed to the scratchings against my skull. I tried to force a memory out from the caverns behind the millennia of compressed stone, but my castle only lowered the drawbridge when I was ready. I waited. It wasn't easy to just lie awaiting the miracle of mental satisfaction, but I had no other choice. Looking back on it now, I don't remember what thought came to my mind that night. I am not certain of its confines nor my concern with it any longer. All that I am aware of is that something came to me that night. I am positive of this because I know that I fell asleep. Something fell asleep at least. Maybe it was inside me. The dark corners of my world within my mind grew. They formed an endless ambiguity, and they regressed the steadfast luminance of the candles in the hall. I didn't stay in my dreams long, though. No time for that. I opened my eyes, and there he laid, next to me. He was there with me, and he was silent. I was startled, to say the least. How could this entity have possibly found me in my sanctuary? His eyes were open, but no expression was apparent. Was he observing me? Was he as shocked as I was? My questions were answered sooner than I thought, for he opened his mouth and said, "Hello, Taylor. It is nice to finally meet you." The guttural bellowings of his voice frightened me, but I did not want him to know what was in my mind. This being said, I knew that he had only opened his mouth to address the thoughts circling inside me. I responded slowly, because the gravity of the situation was still setting in. "I suppose it is nice to meet you as well, although I don't have the pleasure of knowing your name as you do mine." The ever so slight stutter was enough to blow my cover. This person laying next to me was keen. I knew, yet caught my falter. "No need to be afraid. I am not here to hurt you. Promise, only here to show you," he snidely remarked with confidence abundant. I could feel a sense of warmth come over me, and the wind had gone stagnant. I started to wonder why I hadn't gotten up, why I hadn't run away from this situation. I realized there seemed to be no threat, and, to be honest, I wanted to see what he would say next. I waited and finally decided to lay on my side to face him. Up until this point, we were both on our backs, underneath the covers except our faces. When I turned, he did as well. I suppose he felt it was only logical, but I was not sure he understood how unique this memory was. He looked like me, almost identical, except his face was narrower and his jaw more pronounced. His hair was lighter, but it was hard to tell considering my eyes were still adjusting to the darkness. We were close together, so close that I could feel his breath. It was ice, and the coldness of his aroma reminded me of the wind. I got to thinking. Listen, I know that my thoughts are open to you. I know that you sense my fear. I am afraid of you, and I want you to say more. Stop it, he said. I can't interpret your mind. I don't need to. If you want me to leave, I will, but I'll return tomorrow night and the next until you are ready for me. I felt ashamed for some reason after this utterance entered me. Guilt, as if I had let him down with my statement of emotion. We had barely spoken at all, and yet I felt like I owed him something. Questions were puncturing my machinations. Make them stop. I am begging you. You can stay, but I need answers. The implication of my demand didn't fully make known its consequence until it was too late, but I felt as though I had to require something from him. He sighed loudly, and it sent shivers down my spine. The mixture of cold and warmth in the room was intriguing, to say the least. My body was reacting to opposite stimuli every moment. The mental tiring was straining, to say the least. I held my own for as long as I could. I was afraid you might say that. I am not here to give you answers, only to bring you to them. He laid his hand on my shoulder, saying, You have to trust me. Constricting you would be tightening the shackles on me. I gathered the strength to confront him more vehemently. What is your name, and how did you get here? What are you? His hand retracted sharply, as if by pain. As of right now, you know as much about me as I do. I am learning, though. I am learning quickly, and every word exiting your mouth helps. As for how I got here, isn't that obvious? You, of course. How else? I don't know what I am. It really all depends on what you want me to be, I suppose. You ask me of things only yourself can say. The wind was still non-existent. I was capturing everything. My eyes were gathering as much of his face as they could handle. My ears picked up every creak in the room. I was making sure that this was a memory I would surely not forget. I looked over to the digital clock behind him, only to find that the time was reading blank. Was I still dreaming? Obviously. Relief fell over me, and I finally felt at ease. It was time to make this encounter more interesting. Now that I knew for certain I was not in danger, I don't want to name you. Let's be friends, though. I think that would be nice. His expression went from blank to anger instantly. His hand projected outward to grasp my throat with speed and precision, on an uncanny level. I felt myself gasping for air. My eyes went black. The wind rose to a roar from my window, and I lost my hold on reality. When I awoke in the morning, I was facing the other side of where I had been strangled in my dream. I was glad to know I had not forgotten the dream, for it was a common occurrence. Don't make light of me any more. This is not a joke. The words exuded from behind me like a ghost wrapping its deathly fingers around my ear. I cringed and held my breath. It seemed like hours I waited there. I finally convinced myself that I was just paranoid and slowly turned over. My eyes met his dead-on, and my heart stopped. Why are you here? Why am I still dreaming? I asked him with pain in my throat. He only smiled and said, I'm sorry. I was only trying to make you see the truth. I touched him on the face. It was real. I tried to push him softly. There was weight in him. He didn't seem to mind the experiments I was running on him. He finally gathered how hard this was for my mind to wrap around. Stop. Can't you see that I am real? He cackled with much delight. I closed my eyes for a split second to regain composure. But when I had opened them, he was nowhere to be found. I checked underneath my bed like the toddler does for the monster. I looked in my closet and in every corner around the house. It was to no avail. I walked down the long hall between my room and the shower and decided to relax with a long bathing. My mind was racing and my heart would not cease its pounding. I dried myself off and figured that I was finally over the hellish nightmare that plagued me. I looked in the mirror to see if I needed to shave, but then it hit me. Like a sledgehammer to my skull, I collapsed in pain from the sight. There were bruises around my neck. I could see him behind me in the reflection pointing, but not saying a word. I didn't even try to turn around. I knew he wouldn't be there. I walked into the kitchen to find that my mother was already there cooking breakfast. She didn't notice the bruises. She never noticed anything. "Mom, when are we going to the doctor? I have been having trouble sleeping for months now." She pretended like she didn't hear me, but I knew why. Ever since Father died, we never had enough monetary resources to sustain even basic needs, much less unnecessary luxuries. Co-payments for medical checkup fell into the latter category. But my brain sure didn't want to accept that the fort wasn't holding up. I needed sustenance to concentrate. I needed to focus, to gather my thoughts together. Just as I was about to ask how long the food would take to get ready, the plate was gently placed in front of me. The scent of the plate entered my nose. Needless to say, it was not a subtle sense considering my hunger. I ate in haste and was completely satisfied. My opinion of Mother was rising considerably, but I still could not let go her lack of understanding. As I lounged back to try and clear my head, I noticed out of the corner of my eyes that he was standing in the dark laundry room behind the crack of its closed door. I tried to ignore him, but he was as true as a statue in his deliberate staring into my soul. I needed a distraction, but I was hoping for something a little less abrasive than my baby sister screaming from across the house. "Take care of her, would you, son?" I left without saying a word. I welcomed the change of scenery once it sunk in that he was not going to give me peace. I gave Lena her bottle and helped her drink as much as she could. As terrible as it sounds, part of me hated her. Father had left Mother with child before he went missing on a business trip and never returned. As a result, we had another mouth to feed, and needless to say, it caused a multitude of complications for us financially. I held a grudge even though I knew it was irrational. All the memories of the family together was flooding my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. The pain, make it stop. I left the room only to remember I had forgotten to take the bottle with me to be refilled. I saw him staring over the crib looking down on her. He was whispering something, but I couldn't make out what it was. "Stop talking to her. Leave her alone. I thought you were here for me only." I raced to meet him, and I looked at his mouth in disgust. His whispers vanished in realization of my presence. He looked sad, as if I had somehow done him wrong. "Why don't you like me? Why won't you take me seriously? I am not a monster. I am just the first domino. I have what will start a new age for you. I will bring you the truth. I will set you free." He looked different. His face was narrower and his jaw was enlarged. His eyes were sunken in and punctuated by a not-so-subtle line of darkened flesh. His hair was shorter and he seemed taller than I remembered. I responded quickly. "What are you talking about? I have no idea what you want from me or what I am supposed to do. Don't you see how this isn't normal?" His demeanor changed. His movements became more cryptic. He breathed differently, and his eyes were shifting wildly. His mouth didn't move, but I could hear the words clearly. This is all I have ever known. Soon you will know it to be true as well. My heart sank and fear was rising to unforeseen heights in my body. My fortress was destroyed and desecrated. I lost all composure I had and fled from the room. I could hear him laughing hysterically in the background, but I refused to let his reality consume mine. My thoughts were racing as fast as my heart, and there was a chilling draft in the house I did not feel before. I returned to my mother to bring the news that Lena was no longer in agitation. She was pleased, but seemed clueless to the fact that I was catching my breath. I walked back to my room down the hall, the long hall which separated my room from the rest of the house. I sat down and began to search for something to focus on. I pulled out my pocket knife and studied its contours. The blade was shiny and well kept. I loved my knife even though I had never used it for anything. It was a gift from my father, but I don't remember why he thought I would want it. My father, he was always a quiet person, and he was not home for most of what I can remember of my life. His job required him to travel a lot, and I never forgave him for that. I wanted to keep him home. I didn't want him to leave. Memories of him were always painful for me to reminisce because they never lasted long enough for me to gather any real emotions. My mind always hated him for that. I glanced back down at the blade and saw his eyes perfectly aligned in the metal. I quickly snapped the knife back into its handle and tried to forget what I just saw. I needed something to get my mind off of him. Anything to make it stop. Anything would be better than this. The rest of the day was as abysmal as the beginning. He would pop up occasionally to remind me of his existence. Every time that he entered the confines of my senses, I felt the hostility rise. His words became increasingly vague and prophetic. His appearance worsened, and his skin was becoming paler for every encounter. I couldn't bear to look at him anymore. I didn't want him to know that he was winning. Psychologically, he was straining me. He wouldn't attack my body anymore. Maybe he had learned something from the physical assault that he did not want to relive. Whatever the reason, he seldom got close to me anymore. I never trusted him from the beginning. But as the seconds passed, I saw him increasingly as an adversary. My room became more of a prison of nightmares than an escape from reality. I knew eventually night would come, and he would be there, the darkness being his home. My fears once again became a reality. As I laid down in my bed, he was already there waiting for me. He seemed more real at night, as if the silence empowered his voice. The stars shine light, but they will never shed wisdom like I do. It isn't long now you will see the truth. I will help you remember. I am your friend, Taylor. Don't you see that I bit my tongue? When the blood of ties is plastered and dried on the floor, you will come to know the fullness of my being. The wind was picking up again, and I couldn't stop my brain from turning. I refused to respond to him. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of my words for his nourishment. I didn't want him to continue, but my lack of conversing only coerced his message more. I am the carvings on the trees of this land. This plane of reality suits me well. I like it here. I like being out in the open, not stuck in that infinitesimally confounding torture chamber. His implications were full of spite now. I was not deceived by the hopes of him still being on my side. I knew that something was going to happen. I knew that my stronghold would be weakened if I did not act fast. The wind was violent now, and so was my temper. I couldn't bear it any longer. I had to fight back. Shut up. "Shut your hideous mouth. Get yourself out of my bed. Leave me alone. I am not here for you. I know the truth. I know what I need to know." I screamed at him, the condensation droplets from my spit landing on his demonized and white face. He laughed at me. I was giving him exactly what he wanted. I was fueling his power, giving him strength. I couldn't breathe with this realization. My throat was closing as if he was strangling me like the night before. Yet he wasn't touching me at all, only infuriating me with his uncontrollable laughter. "I am going to sleep. Please stop talking and let me have some solace," I said to him after he finally calmed down. "As you wish. But know this. For every moment you waste not accepting me, you only delude yourself further from the truth that I will force you to see. That's something I am willing to risk. Good night." A week passed, and he was no longer a he. He had turned into Annette, a grotesque disfigurement of the original person. Its skin was whiter than white, its eyes glowed in the dark, and they were surrounded by pits as dark and as fiery as hell. Its jaw housed sharpened teeth, and his nostrils had regressed into a serpentine-like arrangement. It was bald and almost twice my size in height. It no longer laid in my bed, but instead resorted to sitting at the foot of my resting place, towering over me when it spoke its deadly transcripts. I grew to hate it, and that fact that it never revealed anything about the situation or how to rid myself of it. It was breathtakingly macabre, almost to the point of tear inducement. I grew used to it, though. I had no other choice. Its voice was distorted, and it became deeper in reverb. It was as if two entities were speaking at the same time, accompanied with accents of growls and screeches. I cowered inside whenever it came close. "I want to know the truth. If it will make you go away, it is worth it." "Anything is worth ridding myself of you," I said with an inch of confidence. In time, it regurgitated with hatred insurmountable. I pulled the covers from under its weight to go over my eyes. I couldn't sleep any other way. I wished to myself that this would be nothing but a distant memory, or laying motionless. The wind reduced its intensity to normal levels, and I inched the covers from over me to find that it had left my sight. It had been so long since I was the only one occupying my bed, and newfound determination filled my mind. I woke to screaming. Excruciatingly horrid cries for help were echoing throughout the room, and I was in a state of frantic confusion as I hurried to gain my senses. I did not realize what was happening, and I searched for it in the shadows. But I saw nothing and no one. I ran down the hall. It seemed like a marathon to reach the rest of the house. The screaming stopped abruptly, and my mind prepared me as best it could. Blood was seeping from my mother's room, and it was seeping fast. I slammed myself into the door and opened it in complete hysteria to find her. She was strewn all across the floor. Her limbs were detached, and her innards painted the walls red. Her head was caved in by brutal force, and was laying on the ground directly in front of me. I cried uncontrollably. Who could have done such a thing? I remembered that the screams were only present a few moments ago, and so I tried to contain my complete terror in order to assess the situation. The killer must still be in the house, here waiting for me. Before I could turn around to hide, I heard a faint crying. Lena, I thought, was surely next. As I hurried to her room as fast as humanly possible, I accepted the possibility that I would be too late. If there was anything I could do, I would do it. But I readied myself for futility and death It was standing there, holding Lena from her right leg upside down. It pulled out my pocket knife and stabbed her relentlessly and mercilessly. I screamed. "Is this the truth you were talking about? Leaving me alone, with no family, with nothing and no one to care for? Answer me, answer me." It dropped my sister's lifeless body onto the floor with no remorse, turned to me, and calmly said, "I only wanted you to finally be free of these bars that have been holding you back. Now you can begin to accept what you are." I felt like I was going to vomit. I could hardly maintain myself from fainting, but I knew I had to fight back. "What kind of monster are you?" I said, defeated and helpless. "I am you. I always have been. I always will be. You cannot run from me. You cannot hide from me. You fool yourself into think you are afraid of me when you reject the truth that we are one and the same." It hissed and began walking closer to me. One step at a time, the wind rose higher and more intense. My brain throbbed in pain. "What are you talking about? Why are you doing this to me?" It laughed with a devilish grin and spoke to me in delight. "This isn't the first time, you fool. You have had your hatred for another and I came out to save you from your torment. You didn't thank me, though. You pushed me back into your prison, and you tried your best to forget the memories. You were succeeding, too. But there's a part of you who never wanted me to leave." I shuddered and slid to the ground, with my back propped up against the door to keep me upright. I was remembering it all. The way I had wanted my sorrow to cease, the way I had wished for the strength to end everything, to destroy the reality that had obliterated my dreams. You wanted your father gone, and I had no choice but to save you. You decided to live a lie after, and you discerned to torment me. I am not enacting my revenge. No, I could never harm you. Here I am trying to help you again, and you still treat me like a beast. I lounged from the ground and snatched the knife from his hand. I wielded it as if I had trained to fight for years and managed to keep it at bay. "No, you can't hurt me, Taylor. It will never work. I will only come back stronger. You have to give and eventually see the truth." I stabbed it in the heart. I pulled out and went in again, reaching as high as I could. At the neck, I left the knife and watched it fall to the ground, lifeless. I grabbed my heart and felt pain arise from beneath my skin. My neck was giving acute pain as well, but my mind was giving me the most trouble. "I can never die. I will never be gone from you. You can't escape me." I remembered this story today and had to write it down to make sure the facts were straight in my head. Except I never had this memory. No, I did. I had to have had this memory, or else how am I remembering it? The wind feels nice today. It brushes up against my face often, but it never feels subtle to me. Help me. Make it stop, please. Anything to just make this stop. 2. Email protected. Story 2. Chameleon. The clock had just struck in the morning. It was what these two young men thought would be the end of another merry night off from the classes at Dormsburg University. Leaving the small diner containing a translucent sheet of cigarette smoke, they were hardly aware of what waited for them in the whispering winter, hardly avoiding Trippy over the last step out of the diner. From a growing sense of fatigue, the busket redhead giggled, whoops, putting his black, weatherproof, fleece-lined jacket over his baby blue polo shirt. The other young college boy asked, "You okay there, Will?" He brushed off the snow that began to gently fall in his head of short, brown hair, yeah, the redhead and a matching coat, as if they were subtly members of a small cult, inquired back. I'm just tired. Stretching open his eyelids with his fingertips, he went on. You know, Hedda, no matter how many times I crash, I never seem to learn my lesson. Hedda raised an eyebrow as the two of them walked through the 3 inches of snow along the parking lot, giving a tiny smirk from all the energy drinks. He squinted at the few cars still sitting in the dimly lit, snowy parking lot. I'm not sure about the food we had, though. Why not? What was wrong with it? I don't know. The burger I got felt like it had a couple tiny, round, hard things in it. Will scoffed, dipshit. Those are called sesame seeds. No, like in the meat itself. You didn't say anything about it. Those were probably just spices. I mean, I ordered one of their atomic burgers. The Bricktop's tone turned somber. That still doesn't sound normal to me. I've had it in food from time to time, and nothing bad's ever happened. Hedda shrugged. I doubt it's a big deal. Well, all right. You know your body better than I would. The only lighting nearby was from the glowing insides of the small Luke's diner. Although the U and the sign flickered as they stood on top of the snow, its buzzing red neon light wasn't potent enough to catch their attention, as that piece of the sign for the 24-hour-a-day restaurant watched apathetically at their confusion. The freezing wind blew harder. It wasn't nearly to the point of inhibiting one's sight, but strong enough to illustrate the harshness of the cold to the two boys. Will, shoving his hands in his corduroy pant pockets, exclaimed, "Come on, we need to find the damn car already. We're supposed to make it by morning." "We're fine. All right." He put his right hand a millimeter in front of his temple, shielding himself from the wind, looking at the few cars still parked along the white blanketed pavement. He spotted the one trunk not layered in snow, although the parking lot hardly had any light to pierce through the angry, ebony sky. Had noticed a glimmer from the blue paint of what he guessed was his trunk. He deducted that since the other cars looked a bit more like massive, white lumps, it was most likely what he was looking for. Sprinting over to what he assumed was the new Hyundai his father bought for him, Etta was followed by proxy. The redhead rushed over to the passenger's side. He clenched the lever to open the door, as though simply gripping the freezing piece of metal would make it unlock any faster. The busket redhead shouted as the bitter wine still managed to crawl up his sleeves. Unlocked the door already. His flesh, although exposed to the winter cold for less than a minute since eating, shivered beyond control. "Wait a sec, will you?" The ring of keys retrieved from his pocket. The brunette pointed a palm-sized, oval-shaped electronic device at the car. He pushed one of the buttons on it, making the car cry a high-pitched whoop. Will was the first to climb it, frantically swinging the car door closed upon sitting down. There was a breeze of warm relief floating in his head at hearing his friend turn on the engine. The warmth spread out, melting the icy touch against his bony hands from hearing the heater starting to run. Still shivering, he turned his head to the left to see what would only provoke exasperation. "What the hell are you doing?" Having just lit a cigarette, Etta turned to his right with a slightly dumbfounded look on his face. The driver's door still open. Bits of white were flying their way in. In the rough wind, the door swayed back and forth by only an inch or two. The coat the brunette had on, however, wasn't shivering nearly as much, and seemed to be thick enough for Etta not to feel a thing that might be crawling along his back. "What?" The driver shoved his lighter and pack of smokes back in his pant pocket. I just want a cig before we head all the way towards Erie. You're not exactly a fan of tobacco. Then do it outside. Facing away from his buddy, Will wrapped his arms around his torso. Bad enough the weather's like this. Now you're bringing it in the car when we should be warming up. Ooh, whatever. Rubbing the tip of his cancer stick against the snowy ground, Etta stuck the remainder of it back into the box it came from. He shut the door and held his right foot against the brake. Although he saw nothing that could have made such a sound, Will faintly heard a low hiss. Gripping his knees, the image of a snake having snuck in came into his mind's eye. A small, jittering morsel of his brain projected this serpent to be hiding along the floor of the car between his friend's snow boots. While this limbless demon tasted the air round its head, it stealthily crawled over Eddie's right boot, its lifeless, gray eyes illuminated towards the redhead's feet. There was a slightly louder hiss as the reptile's ebony body snuck closer to his dress shoes. Approaching and swirling around his left ankle just once, the creature shook its tongue frequently. Despite the cloth covering Will's leg, the reptile could taste the particles of salt coating the little hairs on his skin. It was intoxicating. Its dead eyes stared through the corduroy, and its forked tongue was tasting the air just in front of it by the second. The demon opened its mouth to the cold flesh waiting to be bitten into. Long, wet fangs dripped with molecules of venom, capable of dissolving muscle tissue on its own. At the nanosecond it took for this animal's venom to reach down to the tips of its upper fangs, the youth frantically shook his leg. With the realization of whether or not something really was crawling up his ankle, he finally managed to look down. Nothing. Etta was already looking to his right with his eyes widened. You okay? Yeah, I just... What's that hissing? Oh, just the heater. Why, I've never heard your car make that sound before. Well, yeah, the car's bound to sound a little different during the winter. You're sure that's it? Not once during this conversation did he look back at the driver. Yeah. Is that why you were shaking your leg like that? Will swallowed the little saliva remaining in his mouth. It would have made less sense to say yes than to tell him about the imaginary snake about to bite into his skin. No, I thought I felt something on my leg. That's all. Yeah, that's the heater. I have it set to defrost the windshield and blow against our legs. The busket's eyes went to Etta, attempting to appear as normal behavior. How far is Erie from here again? I don't know. Maybe a little over 2 hours. Oh, he wrapped his arms around his torso even tighter than before. You're not having second thoughts now of old time, are you? We haven't seen our old roommates from school since they transferred from Dormsburg. I mean, Brent's staying at his girlfriend's house, and that's a drive away. If you talked me into it, though, I'm not letting you back down. He gave a tiny chuckle. I know. Shaking his head, Etta smirked. I still wonder how you talked me into doing this. Normally, I'd be back home, studying instead. Like we both said, though, it's been a while. It's winter break anyway. We don't really need to study again until we're back in class. For someone so tense, you take college pretty lightly. The driver looked away from his passenger and to the tranny. Shifting it into reverse, he looked at the rear window, as though he could actually see through it. Oh, excuse me for having a B average. I doubt that'll stop me from getting a good job after graduation. Yeah. As they slowly pulled out from their parking space, the busket looked at the remaining frost on the windshield. The windshield had to have been covered by maybe 75%. It wasn't in much of a certain pattern either. The thin ice took on scattered shapes that were more than large and thick enough for the passenger to not be able to see much of anything. Shouldn't we wait for the car to heat up a little longer?" he asked, looking at the mostly opaque frost. "Nah, we'll be fine." Eddie, still with a frustrated expression, ducked his head by a couple inches. He squinted, looking through the parts of the windshield not layered in ice. "Besides, it'll warm up faster while we're driving anyway. You sure you can see fine?" "Yes, relax, will you?" Pulling back a lever next to the steering wheel sprayed a miniature cascade of windshield washer fluid. It melted only a smaller portion of the ice coating the windshield, but enough for the driver not to lower his head any more on moving down the dark pavement. Reaching the highway, the speed of the vehicle crept up to a quivering 59 miles per hour. The falling snow hit the glass barrier between the bows and Baron, black with more wrathful whines. Breathing against the metal harder than a terribly hungered maniac, the frozen wind sounded as if it were screaming muted words of warning. Will could barely make out the signs himself. With the first green exit of their path sped up to them, it was the only quick exit back towards Dormsburg and its university. Upon passing the sign, and then the several buildings scattered in a disorganized circle like a sophisticated village, the buzzard looked at them the entire time of passing them. He looked at the lights glowing in the black night from the inside of those buildings, pondering what sort of soiree his fellow students were having. He watched as the haven from whatever scornful dread the brutal cold had to offer disappeared into the black as they continued riding, with the place of the buzzard redhead's future, as well as his careless pleasure lost in the ocean of night. He heard the hiss once more, although he was certain was the heater blowing along the car floor. A little bit of him thought his ears caught the sound from the back of his friend's seat. Observing the tiny vicinity to his left, he looked around Eddie's form. Just as before, he didn't spot any extra rider with them. Even though his eyes caught no living creature in that spot, he silently swore that was where the nose spawned from. It would plague his thoughts increasingly along the ride. After all, how would the heater suddenly emanate hot air through only the driver's seat? It was set for merely defrosting the windshield and blowing heat along the car floor. He looked at the knob and the icons around it to show its settings. Yeah, it was only set for those two parts of the car. The taste of paranoia only kept wide awake for the moment, though. After several minutes further down the infinite highway, he began to nod off, before all around him would transform into a lovely void of relieving sleep. The tires of the Hyundai gave a short, hideous screech. His eyes only really jerked open when the car swerved to right, tossing his body off balance. The force shoving Will onto his side, he looked towards his friend. There were howling images of what he imagined moments ago being true, and it having bitten Eddie. Briefly ignoring the intense soreness in his left shoulder, he cried, "What the, Eddie?" With a startled expression, the driver looked back at him. "Oh, sorry about that. Wasn't trying to wake you." "What was that? You okay?" His eyes frantically shifting around his friend's form, Will saw no apparent harm done. "Yeah, sorry. Almost missed the exit to 79 North." The redhead's eyebrows and jaw dropped. "Really? Yep. Jesus, and I thought something was actually wrong. Oh no, we're fine." "Yeah, except the roads are still frozen." "Why don't you make us crash before we get there?" Eddie's voice turned much quieter. "Sorry." For the next couple minutes, the only sounds were from the engine humming, the tires rolling along the snow, and the windshield wipers swaying at full speed. Whatever. Will sat back up and looked at the angry snowfall just outside. Just be more careful. Actually, as he went on, the driver's tone normalized. I've been meaning to ask you something. The passenger's eyes shifted back to his friend's face instantly. Have you been watching the news lately? Eddie gently held his stomach with one hand. He gripped it as if it were falling apart, and his attempts to hold it in one piece were becoming more useless by the second. Can't say I have. I mean, it's usually all the same. Why? Although it probably wasn't going to be too concerning or pleasant, the passenger couldn't help feeling a seated curiosity. It wasn't the sort of subject his companion would bring up often at all. Apparently, this breed of snake was just discovered. Merely at the word snake, Will dragged himself closer to the car door. Oh, yeah? It's called the chameleon snake, and a few people in Pennsylvania were just hospitalized and killed from its bite. Really? Will's breathing turned heavy with the thought. We're in PEA, a bit south of Dormsburg, closer to Philly. The news report was saying that their reproduction rate is nearly that of the common housefly. Similar to Will's, the brunette at the wheel's breaths were becoming heavier. However, they were far slower, as if trying to calm waving tides in his organs. Raising an eyebrow, the passenger inquired, "You all right?" A sickly belch forced its way up Eddie's throat. "Yeah, just don't feel too good. I'm a little nauseous. I'll be fine. If you need to puke or something, I won't get mad if you pull over." "Hey, I'd hope not. Anyway, like its name, it can blend in perfectly with the color of its environment and survive in both warm and cold temperatures." How? Snakes are cold-blooded. It sounds like bullshit to me. Typically, but this animal's mesothermic. It can use its metabolism to heat up its body. The venom's kind of unique, though. It still sounded a bit too wild for the redhead to completely believe. Eddie was a biology major, though, and Will noticed through rooming with him, the evidently sickly driver always did his research. Why's that? Usually, a snake bite causes feverish symptoms: swelling, pain at the bite, blurry vision, numbness, nausea. Hearing nausea, the passenger's paranoia transformed into being far sharper in taste. Wait, nausea? The driver rolled his eyes. For fuck's sake, Will, I wasn't bitten by anything. If I were bitten by something, especially a snake, I think I would have noticed. A snake biting you is definitely something you'd feel. I just have an upset stomach. It's probably just a little food poisoning. Damn burger at Luke's probably did it. I didn't notice anything wrong with it at the diner, but I wouldn't be that surprised. A friend of mine got a little food poisoning from their food a little while back too. It's the first time it's happened to me, but it was probably still a bad idea. Frankly, I'm surprised you're not sick too. No, just a little scared. You sure you're all right? Yes, Jesus. Okay. Sorry. What were you saying? It's fine. The poison is a little unique because it didn't display any of those symptoms in the victims. Except one of them, they just felt nauseated. No vomiting, though. Everyone's blood actually froze up from it, though. The venom's made up of a strange chemical composition. What makes it even scarier is that sometimes it lays eggs in living flesh. Holy hell, how would it do that? Not sure. Maybe raw meat. I mean, uncooked flesh is still technically alive for a short time. The weirdest thing about the venom, though, is how the composition changes. Hold on, it changes, yeah. Scientists started experimenting with it to try to develop an anti-venom from it. They didn't manage to do that, but found that the effects changed from heat. When they had the venom at room temperature, the composition changed underneath a microscope. When it came into contact with a small, controlled sample of blood, the blood itself started boiling. The petri dish it was on started shattering from it. By that point, Will was as backed up into the car door as his body would allow. Yeah, he gave an insincere chuckle. Just had to be goddamn snakes. Sorry, not trying to scare you, but a more violent belch spewed from the driver. I just got concerned, and I'm trying to tell people. I'm just concerned, you can. Eddie was panting. Breaths were going in and out of his body at a tempo of desperation. Oh, Jesus, we need to stop. Hitting the brakes fast enough to try not to puke in the vehicle, but gently enough not to slide too much. Eddie panted harder, although he gave what he thought was good judgment. The car still slid about half a foot while they slowed down to the shoulder of the road, just barely avoiding hitting the guardrail. To their right, the sick student forced his door open and walked up next to the empty pavement. Bent over, the hot, bubbling contents of his stomach splattered out of his body. From his mouth, the somewhat acidic ooze melted through the ice just in front of him. The passenger covered his ears at the painful groans from his friend. He waited, saying nothing. Even after Eddie was finished emptying his stomach and spitting what remainders he could get out of his mouth, the redhead didn't say anything. At first, he just sat there, startled not only at his friend's apparent illness, but how Eddie gave it no further reaction. He waited until Eddie continued driving, smirked, and said, "That feels better. Christ, you sure about that?" "Oh, yeah, I just—" The confident grin dissipated from his visage. He stayed silent, staring directly forward. With the silence, the confident college student's mouth gradually lowered, hanging and completely let go. Just what? Will just sat there for a second, expecting his friend to say something back. "Eddie?" He gently shook the brunette's shoulder. "Eddie. Hey, Eddie. What's wrong?" He turned his head to face the same direction the driver was staring in, trying to find an object of attention. There was only the windy, snowy road that seemed to go on forever. He pointed his increasingly growing panic at Eddie, noticing that the driver didn't even blink since the beginning of his silence. "Come on, Eddie. Don't fuck with me. This isn't funny." Another few seconds of thinking perhaps the driver was trying to pull some inept joke. Will's vivid recollection reminded him that throughout the years of knowing one another, Eddie never did such a thing. "Eddie, what's wrong?" Just as the passenger was taking out his cell phone to call for an emergency, he noticed the flux of the road before them. They were quickly approaching a slight turn to the right. The driver's hands weren't corresponding, though. "Jesus." Eddie turned. "What are you?" The brunette's flesh had already grown unusually pale. The whiteness of his skin was nearly that of the snow outside of the Hyundai, speeding at a solid 60 miles per hour. Just as the panicking student looked back through the windshield, all his eyes picked up was the guardrail. The front of the new car smashed and smoking against the edge of the highway. Will found himself lying against the airbag. His phone was anywhere near his hand or his sight. A throbbing, crushing pain pulsed through his head and spine. He squirmed about, panting heavier than ever before. He found himself able to move his arms, neck, and head, but not without the sharp sting of pain. His legs were immobile, though, As far as the passenger could tell, they had no feeling whatsoever. That was only the concern for the moment, though. He looked again to Eddie's motionless form, thinking that perhaps his friend simply went unconscious somehow. He grabbed the driver's wrist. The feeling was cold, far more so than the touch of any human flesh his fingers have touched before. Nonetheless, Will pushed his thumb on his friend's wrist. No pulse. Maybe his thumb was simply in the wrong spot. Several more attempts at finding a pulse, and there was still none. The frozen husk was gazing into Will's eyes. The corpse's eyes and jaw were still open, as though trying to shriek in pain or fear. Although he was dead, the passenger could hear something airy seeping from his mouth. It wasn't the sound of a man's breath, though. The sound wasn't nearly heavy enough. Tears starting to rise to the survivor's eyes, he suspected that the sound was nothing more than a product of denial. He completely came to the conclusion that it wasn't simply wishing that Eddie really was still breathing. The focal point of his attention changed with the sound of the apparent breathing. It was indeed not that of a man. It was in fact a low hiss. As the passenger listened for a moment in disbelief, it only grew louder. A narrow mass approached the edge of Eddie's mouth and began to poke out. A smack of horror confusion struck Will as to how his friend's tongue was suddenly beginning to hang out. Eddie. There was no response. The narrow heap of flesh pointed at the only survivor. Two dark, circular shapes, one at both sides of what was presumed to be the driver's tongue, appeared. The dead-colored gray of them glared at Will, a small, forked tongue shaking in the air before it. The clearly living mass showed much more length as it sunk from the corpse's frozen jaw. At seeing the serpent, Will desperately whimpered against to the door. Unlocking the car door, he finally witnessed the end of the serpent drop from Eddie's jaw as the creature drew nearer to him. Slithering to the crippled student's seat, the serpent proved to have been a good 3.5 feet in length. As the demon more frequently tasted the air before it, its color immediately changed from that of the corpse's tongue to that of the car seats. Opening the way back into the angry, frozen outside, something else sunk from the edge of Eddie's mouth. Much smaller devils of the very same shape and changing hue of the snake approaching will crawl onto the floor. Without a second's hesitation, they followed their leader. Well aware he wasn't able to run or even walk, he dropped from the car to the highway shoulder. The wind was at its most furious. The velocity of the falling snow was nearly blinding the survivor. Moving at an unbearably slow pace, he put one hand in front of his face, blocking a fraction of the ice crystals. The other was only struggling to drag his limp body. There were occasional headlights that made themselves visible at the black horizon. Will waved his arms about, but he didn't see any of the cars stop. They didn't even slow down, and the wind from them sliced into his face. Between every rare chance at being picked up, he continued to drag himself down the highway. There were no exit signs anywhere near him, though. Nevertheless, he squirmed along the frozen pavement as the group of snakes crawled up his legs. Story 3. The little wooden box. It was your standard blue-collar work day in at 9, work for 8 hours, out by 5. My dad was on his way home to have a standard blue-collar evening when something not so standard happened. Driving home from work, his car was hit by some dash-a-bag pickup truck driver on the freeway trying to merge into the fast lane. He merged into my dad. Instead, my dad's car was sandwiched between this big-ass pickup truck and the concrete divider. Came out of the accident looking like a Picasso rendering of a meat grinder. My dad fared only slightly better. He broke several ribs, and his left arm looked like it had been run through Sid Cubist meat grinder. The surgeons couldn't save it. The doctor said my dad was lucky to have lost his left arm, since he's right-handed. Lucky? The doctor said. How is it they all have such god-awful bedside manner? My dad had to stay in the hospital a good 2 months, long enough to rack up a breathtaking amount of debt in the form of medical bills. When my dad finally got out, he was nowhere close to functional. He had a long road of physical therapy and routine hospital visits ahead of him before he could go back to work, assuming there'd even be a job left for him when he'd recovered. He was next to useless around the house. You'd never guess how much you have to use your offhand for. Well, damn near everything. What this amounted to was a giant crock of shit for me, my mom, and my sister to deal with on a daily basis, to say nothing of how my dad must have felt. Useless, powerless, a burden to our family. I'm not telling you all this to get sympathy. My family and I have had our fill of that, and it doesn't do much for anyone. I'm telling you this so you understand why we were so grateful for it at first. The little wooden box. My dad started seeing a psychiatrist about a month after being released from the hospital. He's not much for getting mental help, one of those guys that seems to think people get fixed the same way cars do, and doesn't understand why someone can't just take a look under the hood and fix it themselves. But as he put it, he'd felt too shitty for too long and had to do something about it. His doctor recommended the psychiatrist to him about the only useful thing that doctor did. The psychiatrist, this dweeby guy with an equally dweeby Dr. Freud goatee, diagnosed my dad with post-operative depression. Not that terms like that tell you jack shit about what the person's going through. After a couple unproductive sessions, the psychiatrist decides to try something unorthodox. The psychiatrist takes out this little box made of cedar, pine, or some other light wood. It's small, you could fit a dime store book in there, but not much else, and mostly plain. Some modest scroll work in the corners, but little else in the way of decoration. Whenever you feel angry or sad or frustrated, the psychiatrist says, I want you to take some time to yourself. All right. What you're going to do then is take this box, open it up, and stuff all the bad feelings inside. You keep doing that until you get all that icky stuff out. And when you've done that, you're going to close that box, put it away, and you're going to focus on getting better until you need the box again. My dad spent a good hour stomping and swearing when he got home from that session. Lots of talk about pretentious medical professionals, wasted money, and some creative ideas for alternate places the psychiatrist could put his little wooden box. I half expected my dad to take out his frustration on the box and break it in two. Once he was done ranting and raving, however, he just set it on a shelf in my parents' room. A week and a half after my dad got the little wooden box, my dad's boss called the house. He told my dad that he had to let my dad go and replace him. In plain terms, my dad was fired. Time is money, as the saying goes, and my dad was taking too much of both to recover. There was no screaming and cursing this time. Getting fired took the fight right out of him. After hanging up the phone, my dad locked himself in my parents' room. My mom and sister tried to get him to come out and talk, but he was having none of it. I almost decided to help, but I figured my dad might have needed a little time to himself. It turns out I was right. After 3 hours, My dad comes out of there with the biggest smile I've ever seen and starts making mac and cheese for dinner. It was an absolute mess. He got flour and dry pasta on every flat surface of the kitchen, and the sauce was full of cheese chunks that he hadn't been able to cut properly. But that smile never once left his face, and I'll tell you what, that shitty mac and cheese was the best dinner I have ever had. It was all thanks to that box my dad sat down with that thing for 3 hours, dumped all his frustration into it, and came out of my parents' room a changed man. After using the box, he wouldn't get discouraged when his missing arm stopped him from doing something. He'd just come back at it with twice the effort, and eventually he'd get done what he wanted to get done. He went to therapy with a smile and came back exhausted, but still smiling. When things got rough, when his job search wasn't going well, or the medical bills got too expensive, even if he just had a hard time brushing his teeth, he locked himself in my parents' room with that little box and came out a couple hours later ready to take on the world again. My family and I were grateful for that little wooden box. It was a godsend when we needed one most. It's not the nature of things to just magically get better, though miracle wooden boxes aside. It started with little bumps in the middle of the night a week or two after my dad used his little box for the first time. Unsettling, but not too worrisome. My sister and I talked about it a little, but when you're talking about it in the middle of the day, you find easy explanations. Older houses crack and pop as they cool off with changes in the weather. These explanations seemed thin when I sat in bed listening to noises that sounded not at all like cracks and pops. But I hung in there, and soon they were more of an annoyance than anything else. If it had stopped there, I might have contented myself with that easy explanation. It did not stop there, however. Bits of our house would go from warm to freezing in seconds. I'd never known our house to be drafty, so when my mom and sister chalked it up to seams in the house causing drafts, I had a harder time buying it. Now, a little about me. I'm a curious person. I see something I don't understand, I stare at it, think about it, poke it and prod it, until I do. I'm not going to start jumping at shadows for no goddamn reason, but if it walks and talks like a duck, so I did a little research. Our house was around a long time before we moved in, so I figured there might be an unpleasant bit of history that could shed some light on what was going on. I went the whole nine, went to the courthouse to get the original permit, asked around at the city planning department, checked newspapers. I expected to find an old owner who died tragically, or maybe a dysfunctional family that might have left some bad blood in the house. Instead, I found nothing especially dark, at least, or even out of the ordinary, just a list of previous tenants and an old article about my neighborhood's construction. Skeptic that I am, I found myself a little disappointed. Everyone loves a good ghost story. I let the matter sit for another week or two. My curiosity had not been satisfied, however, and the bumps in the night, the footsteps where there shouldn't have been any, didn't let up. I was forced to consider a possibility. I would have preferred to ignore the little wooden box. I was sure it had nothing to do with anything, but I had a hard time convincing myself that it was a coincidence that everything started happening after my dad brought it home. I called up my dad's psychologist. Hearing that my dad was putting the box to good use put him right over the moon. After he settled down a little, I asked him about the box. I half expected to hear that he bought it off some seedy vendor or found it in the basement of an old mansion. I was disappointed to hear the profoundly mundane explanation that it was a woodworking project given to him by his nephew. Before I called it quits on my little investigation, I wanted to take a look at the box itself. I doubted I'd find anything, but if I didn't take a look, it would eat at me until I did. My sister said I shouldn't. It was an invasion of my dad's privacy. She said, but I figured what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. So when my mom took my dad to therapy one day, I decided to check the little box out. The box wasn't hidden or anywhere out of reach, just sitting on my dad's bedside table. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly. I just wanted to look at it, if nothing else, hold it in my hands, see if I felt any kind of vibe coming off of it. I picked it up and was immediately struck by its weight. The wood wasn't heavy. I remembered my dad waving it around after he first brought it home like it was nothing, but the box felt dense somehow. I tilted the box in my hands. Nothing inside shifted or rolled around as the box moved, though. Attempting to curb my curiosity, little I couldn't completely deny that I was snooping on something personal of my dad's. I ran my hands over the scroll work on the edges of the box, feeling the uneven finish along the sides. There's only so much you can do with an empty box, however, so I decided to indulge my curiosity a little more and open it. I had barely managed to open it a crack before I heard the car doors closing. My parents were home. I hurried to close it and set it back on its table and threw it into the wall by accident. It seemed half as heavy as it had before, though I had probably just adjusted to its weight. Setting the box down more carefully, I noticed an odd odor in the air. Whatever was in the box smelled like burnt motor oil. I turned on the fan in my parents' room, hoping it would take care of the smell. I dashed into my room as the front door opened, flopped on my bed, and opened up a book. My parents said hi as they headed back to their room and closed their door. 15 minutes passed without incident. I decided I was probably in the clear and breathed a sigh of relief. That night, maybe early the next morning, I was awakened by an odd noise. These were not new at this point, but I felt especially uneasy for some reason. I listened for a moment, hoping I could identify it as something 100% normal. I was somewhat relieved when I recognized it. TV static. Not wanting to add a high electric bill to my parents' long list of worries, I willed myself to shake off my lingering anxiousness and get up to go to the family room and turn it off. Walking into the living room, I saw a figure sitting in a chair in front of the TV. My dad, silhouetted by the static the TV was playing. I asked my dad what he's doing watching static in the middle of the night. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, in a tired voice I recognized from the first days after he came home from the hospital, he told me to go back to sleep and stop bothering him. He picked the remote up off the end table to the left of the chair and turned down the TV a little. I was more than a little curious about the sudden change in his mood from the past few days, but decided it would be best not to push the issue, and went back to my room. As I got into bed, something bizarre occurred to me when my dad grabbed the remote. I didn't see his shoulders move to reach across to his left. I dismissed it as my half-sleeping brain playing tricks on me and tried to go back to sleep. As my sister and I got ready for school the next morning, My dad emerged from my parents' room sleepy-eyed and yawning. My sister asked him if he slept well. He said no, he'd had trouble sleeping. I told him that looking at TV static in the middle of the night wasn't likely to help a bout of insomnia, maybe not the greatest thing to joke about. But I get pissy when I don't get enough sleep. My dad looked at me all confused. He asked what the hell I was talking about. I asked him what the hell he was talking about. Again, tact is not my strong suit when I'm tired. This carried on for a minute or two before my mom told us both to knock it off. When I'd cooled off a little, it occurred to me that my dad had seemed genuinely confused by my question. He didn't remember me finding him in front of the TV last night. Maybe it was a weird side effect of the 1,000,001 meds he was on. I thought nothing more of it until the week afterward, when I came home to find my sister having an argument with my dad. She was complaining that he had yelled at her from our parents' room to stop making so much noise when she got home. My dad insisted he'd been napping for hours, and she was imagining things. When I walked into the family room, my dad stormed out, complaining about having to deal with this shit after his box broke. I asked him what was wrong with the box. I tried not to appear nervous, remembering my clumsy handling of it while my mom and Dad were away the previous week. My dad said one of the hinges on it was broken, and it wouldn't close all the way. I offered to try to fix the hinge. My dad just about lost his shit, threatening to ground me for half a year if I touched his box. We all stood glaring at each other for a minute before my dad sighed and left the room. He shut himself in my parents' room, probably to use the box. My sister and I decided to focus on our homework until our dad came out. A couple hours later, he emerged from my parents' room shuffling his feet and acting sorry. He apologized for yelling at us. He still didn't remember hollering at my sister about making noise, but he apologized for it. Anyway, we said it was okay and went back to our homework, not wanting to add to the increasing amount of eerie shit going on at our house. We tried again to find easy explanations. People sometimes get forgetful as they age. Hell, I can barely keep my own schedule straight, and I am supposed to be in the prime of my life. A guy in his mid-40s with all kinds of drugs with unpronounceable names pumping through him all day. Things will get forgotten, and that's likely to make a person a little frustrated. Perfectly natural, perfectly normal. This is what my mom told me and my sister when we talked to her about Dad forgetting things we'd all seen or heard him doing. Neither of us believed it, and our mom knew it. Our mom didn't believe it, and we knew it, but that little box was what kept our dad going. None of us wanted things to go back to the days before the box, so none of us called anyone else out on our little merry-go-round of denial. These slips of memory got increasingly hard to ignore and were never pleasant. It was always my dad yelling at someone or stomping around upstairs while the rest of us were cooking dinner or watching TV. We did our best not to point out these strange things. We talked about it amongst ourselves, but never in front of our dad. My dad isn't stupid, though. He could tell that we were keeping things from him. Try as we might, it was too difficult to know what he would and wouldn't remember, and we might occasionally let something slip. When this happened, when any of us received that blank stare that meant we just mentioned something he didn't remember, we did our best to change the subject and keep from bringing it up again. My dad noticed when this happened And that pissed him off royal. I guess that's where I get my aggressive curiosity. This meant more and more time spent alone with the box to calm himself down. As my dad used the box more and more, however, his memory slips became more and more frequent. He would forget things more and more often, and his mood during these slips would get worse and worse. What started as irritability turned into rage and eventually violence. Late one night, my sister woke up to get herself a midnight snack and found our dad standing in the middle of the kitchen with all the lights out, staring out the window into the backyard. She asked him what he was doing. He didn't say anything. She told him to stop scaring her and go back to bed. My dad still didn't say anything. Instead, he took a pan from the sink and threw it at her. Thankfully, my sister was able to dodge it and run back to her room where she cried herself to sleep. Naturally, my dad remembered nothing in the morning. That's where I drew the line. I understood wanting to be considerate and giving my dad some leeway on his road to recovery, but that shit was inexcusable, and my family deserved better. And this Jekyll and Hyde bullshit, the next time my dad got into one of his moods, I'd call him on it. It would get ugly, but it needed to be done. I figured I wouldn't have to wait long. I figured right. The night after I decided I needed to level with my dad about everything, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of static from the TV. This would be the third time this month I'd find my dad sitting in the dark in the living room, staring at a dead channel on TV. Fighting a growing sense of unease at having to confront my dad, I got up and went downstairs to the family room. I found him just as I had before, sitting in darkness and silence apart from the static from the TV. By way of greeting, I told him he would have trouble getting sleep staring at the TV all night. He told me to mind my own goddamn business and go back to bed. That sent my politeness right out the window. I told him he had to cut this shit out. He was scaring the hell out of my mom and sister with his behavior, and it was tearing our family apart. He wasn't doing himself any favors. Either he just ended up angrier and was relying on that little box more and more. I told him he had to end the vicious circle here and talk about what was bothering him. Like an adult, my dad was silent for a moment. I nearly yelled at him to just say something, anything, when I noticed his shoulders heaving. I thought he might have started crying before I heard that he was laughing. The old bastard was laughing at me. I told him that of all the reactions, he should have to what I told him. Laughter was the least appropriate. My dad got a hold of himself and said I should go get his box for him. We could talk after he spent a little time with it. I figured he was probably stalling, but I went to grab the box anyway. That laugh had severely unnerved me, and I wanted to get out of the room as soon as possible. I walked back up the stairs and opened my parents' door as quietly as I could. My mom is a pretty heavy sleeper, so is my dad when he's actually sleeping, but I didn't want to be careless and wake her up on accident. My eyes hadn't quite adjusted to the dark, not wanting to bash my toes on the furniture in my parents' room. I turned on my phone and used the screen for minimal light. I aimed the weak light at the nightstand and was surprised to see the box with its lid wide open. I walked closer and was hit with a strong odor, burnt motor oil. I moved to cover my mouth and accidentally shined the phone light on my mom and my dad. They are both in bed sleeping. My dad stirs and mutters something as he rolls over. I stare at my sleeping parents, uncomprehending. I start backing out of the room, shaking my head as if I can make sense of this mess. With mindless denial, backing out of the room, I bump into something behind me. I turn around and I'm greeted with a nightmare version of my dad. His eyes are bloodshot and glaring at me in abject rage, but they are also watery, leaking tears down his contorted face. His mouth is twisted in a grimace of pain, no, of anguish. I feel feverish heat rolling off of him, and I am overwhelmed with waves of horrible feelings: anger, depression, pain, exhaustion. It all washes over me, and I am paralyzed by it all, and I can do nothing but gape at this warped twin of my dad. Before I can begin to process the horror standing in front of me, the thing wearing my dad's face pushes me. I fall down the stairs as it looks at me with that horrible mixture of everything awful that a human being can feel. I hit the bottom of the stairs hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I try to yell for my parents, but I can't get anything louder than a wheeze out. I look around to find something to grab onto and pull myself up. Before I can find anything, I feel myself being lifted by the throat. Already short of breath, I see dark spots appear before my eyes. Before my vision fades completely, I see my nightmare dad's twisted face leering at me as he lifts me in the air with his left arm. I look again at the arm that shouldn't be there and see blackened, shriveled skin. What little flesh it had was hanging off in decaying chunks, and bone showed through gaps in the skin. My stomach heaves to no avail as my throat is crushed and my lungs burn. As I lose consciousness, a final disturbing thought fires through my dying mind. The thing holding me by the throat, this vision of rage and agony and misery that's been haunting my family, I set it free. You don't need to die to leave a ghost. You cram enough suffering into one place. Force it from your head and into a plain wooden box for someone to open and unleash on the world, and you'll get a tormented spirit as surely as if you died a tragic death. Looking at the thing one last time, its face contorted into a mask of misery as it holds me by the throat. I have just enough time to pray that my mom and sister don't have to learn this the hard way.